Okay, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Miriam Institute webinar. As ever, I would like to begin by expressing my profound thanks to my colleague and co-founder, Rosita Panini. Rosita, thank you for everything that you do. And also to our colleague in common, the great and powerful Ayalon. Ayalon, thank you so very much for working behind the scenes to bring about this event. Now, friends, as Israel enters into an unprecedented fourth round of elections, the Miriam Institute is delighted to bring about this exclusive webinar asking the question, can Israel's electoral system be salvaged? Long-standing issues of electoral dynamics in the Jewish state have been heightened in the COVID-19 era. The outsized role in political sway and persuasion, for example, played by the Haredim or ultra-Orthodox parties, has become the focus of the ire of many an Israeli voter. The question of whether or not a prime minister under indictment ought to be able to remain in situ is also one of growing intensity in the minds of the voters. And beyond those types of issues, as the conversation in the United States has led some to ponder whether or not a third or even fourth political party would be beneficial in the context of the American electoral system, in Israel, the plethora of political parties, those that represent sectors within sectors within sectors, has really made the business of coalition building exceptionally complex and seemingly untenable. To discuss all of those issues and much more, we are delighted to host two experts representing divergent political views for today's discussion. Danny Ayalon served as Israel's ambassador to the United States from July 2002 to November 2006. During that time, relations between the two countries reached an all-time high. Strategic, political, and economic ties were deepened and expanded across the board. Ambassador Ayalon indeed played a leading role in securing the agreement for $10 billion in US grants and loan guarantees to the State of Israel, the roadmap to peace, the historic exchange of letters between President Bush and PM Ariel Sharon, and the bilateral trade that reached $20 billion and another $10 billion in investment. From 1997 to 2002, prior to his appointment to the United States, Ayalon served as foreign policy advisor to Prime Ministers Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak, and as chief foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. As a member of Israel's Foreign Service from 1989 to 1997, he represented Israel as a consul in Panama and as a member of Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations. Before government service, Danny Ayalon worked in the private sector as a senior financial executive. He's a graduate of Tel Aviv University with a BA in economics and labor studies, and he holds an MBA from Bowling Green State University in Ohio in the United States. He also served as a captain in the IDF Armored Corps. He is representing the right side of the political aisle, or center-right side of the political aisle in my estimations, but I'll allow him to correct me if he disagrees with that description. He's joined by Dr. Nachman Shai. Dr. Nachman Shai is a former member of Knesset, where he served from 2009 to 2019 as a member of the Labour Party. Prior to that, Dr. Shai served as Senior Vice President and Director General in the Israel Bureau of the UJC, the Federations of North America. He also held the position of Chair of the Israeli Broadcasting Authority from 1999 to 2000. Dr. Shai was the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Science, Culture, and Sport. He concluded his military career in the IDF at the rank of Brigadier General, a career that culminated in his service as spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces, including during the First Gulf War. Dr. Shai earned his PhD in political science and communications from Bar-Ilan University. He was associate researcher at the John Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard University John F. Kennedy's School of Government. He is a visiting lecturer at Duke University in North Carolina. Now, the conversation between these two experts will be expertly orchestrated by broadcaster extraordinaire Johnny Gould, an adjunct at the Miriam Institute. In addition to his 30-year career in broadcast journalism, Johnny Gould has become a prolific podcaster and is fast emerging as Anglo Jury's go-to interviewer. As a news commentator at Sky News and BBC Radio, Johnny frequently, and I would say bravely, raised concerns about what he saw as the new threat from the hard left, led by Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. He gained a reputation for outspoken views rarely voiced on UK TV. In response to the unchecked and sudden rise of UK anti-Semitism, Johnny Gould's Jewish State was launched, and you can find that wherever you find your podcasts. That podcast serves as an archive and library of the changing temperature for one of the West's oldest Jewish communities and is a window into the dynamic of the day for members of Anglo Jewry. I cannot recommend highly enough that podcast. Johnny's list of interviewees constitutes a who's who of the Jewish and non-Jewish world, focusing upon Israel and the Jewish story. He's a board member of the Israel Diaspora Trust. Johnny regularly receives off-the-record briefings by influencers and decision makers across the US, Israel, and the UK, information which greatly informs his podcasting style, some episodes of which you can find on the Miriam Institute website under the Adjunct tab on Johnny's profile. Johnny, with all of that having been said, Ambassador Ayalon, Dr. Shai, on behalf of me and everybody at the Miriam Institute, I'm delighted to hand this over to you, and we look forward to learning from you by way of this conversation.
And welcome. Thank you very much indeed to you, Benjamin, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you also to Rosita Panini and to Alan Langer. It is a real privilege and honor for me to be hosting this webinar today. The big subject, can Israel's electoral system be salvaged? Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you. As so often happens, events concerning Israel always seem to overtake us. The Jewish Chronicle here in the UK posted an exclusive this morning confirming Mossad was behind the remote control assassination of Iran's chief nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Can I ask you, sir, first of all, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, welcome, sir. The timing of any Iranian revenge attack, will it be tempered by the new Biden administration? Is it correct to perceive President Biden to be soft on Iran?
Well, thank you, Johnny. It's a pleasure to be here on your show, and of course, at the host of Benjamin and Rosita and Ellen, the Miriam Institute. And of course, it is an honor and pleasure to be here with my very good friend, longtime friend, Dr. Nachman Shai. By the way, we also served in the Knesset together from 2009 until 13, when I left and he stayed for, for like 8 more years or so. In any case, to your question, there is no doubt in my mind that the Ayatollahs in Iran are very much mindful to where the US is headed in relation to the Iran problem, specifically the nuclear issue. They are now on the verge of collapse economically, which financially, which could lead also at some point to a political chaos, which is the last thing that they need. The one thing that they have in their mind, in their I would say supreme objective, is to maintain power and to keep the revolution, the very radical Shiite Islamic revolution. In order to do that, they need now a calm and quiet in the international community, and especially vis-a-vis the United States. And this is why we see them actually like, I would say, walking on eggshells since the Biden's election, because they would not like to start the relationship with the United States under the Biden administration on the wrong foot. This is why we probably will see them tame on the one hand when it comes to terror, of course, excluding what they are best at, using proxies. So whatever they will continue to do, and I have no doubt that they will try to harm Israeli or American interests, they will continue to do it, but without leaving any, I would say, fingerprints. But officially, they will try to be on a very, very good behavior until they figure out where Biden is headed when it comes to the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran from 2015, which under Trump, the United States left. But tame as they may be seemingly on the terror front, they are going to be very, very tough when it comes to positioning themselves towards negotiations with the United States, as possibly with a P5 plus six, that mainly the five powers of the United Nations Security Council and Germany. So they will continue to play brinkmanship over there in order to get maximum result for their interests vis-a-vis the JCPOA. Namely, they are still adamant and publicly said that the first step should be done by the United States, namely going back to the JCPOA without any further conditions and lifting the sanctions. On the other hand, we hear that both Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and President Biden himself said that, of course, their aim is to go back to the JCPOA, but it's not unconditional, and also it needs some improvement. And also they say, the Americans, is that the first step is for the Iranians to stop enrichment and basically to go back to the line of enrichment of 2018, meaning 300 kilograms of uranium at 3.5%. So I would say, to sum it up, very tough terror policy through proxies, but very tame politically vis-a-vis the Americans and international community, but also very tough on the JCPOA.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that answer, which was slightly as not advertised, but I think that the events of today are so significant. I'm very grateful for your answer. So now, on to another election. During this pandemic, Israel is high on democracy, something which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned against because it costs so much more than the budget to run a government. Professor Nachman Shai, the irony of him saying not another election is actually he will probably be the main beneficiary of it with an increased majority.
No more prophets left in the Holy Land, and no one can tell you what the outcome of the elections is going to be, Johnny. I'd like also to join my friend Danny Ayalon and thank you, the Institute, Rosita, Benjamin, you, Danny, that our friendship is going back to, I don't know, the beginning of the years of the State of Israel, and you, Johnny. So I don't know who's going to win the elections. It may be Netanyahu, and it may not be Netanyahu as well, because it's all open. The very fact that we are now going for the fourth elections in 2 years is in a way is a tragedy for the people of Israel and for the state of Israel. It has never been, it has never occurred in our history, and it doesn't speak well for the credit of the Israeli democracy that's unable to produce a stable government for 4 years. The average term by the way of Israeli government is 3, so but not half a year or 11 months. So it's time to check the system as well. What's wrong with the system? But at the same time, currently the issue is for or against Netanyahu. There's not much ideology, I would say. At least a significant portion of the center right in Israel, those who used to vote for Likud or similar parties close to the Likud, do not want specifically and personally Netanyahu to serve any longer as Israel prime minister. And that's why they choose to vote for other parties. I don't see much of ideological conflict here at the present. Not that they don't exist, they do. And I would like very much that they will be part of the public discourse or the political discourse in Israel. But apparently they were pushed aside. And the entire state is not focusing on the question whether Netanyahu will have the 61 vote or not. which is a big mistake on the one hand, but the other hand, this is probably the only question which is relevant to the elections, because if none of the political parties or the political camps is able to produce at least 61 votes, we are going to head immediately to the fifth election, the sixth election. But that's not a game. This is not a game. In between election camp, there is a state by the name Israel with 9.2 million citizens suffering heavily and deeply from the pandemic. High employment is high. Of course, we were able to vaccinate many of the Israelis. That's fine. That's a world record. But that's now doesn't tell the whole story. It tells only one segment of the whole story. The whole story is that the government failed to run the country during this period and was not able to continue as much as possible normal life. Education system returned to Israel today after over a year that young boys and girls, the young students had to stay home and drive their parents crazy and doing very little. That's zooming in, zooming out, zooming in, zooming out. And they lost 1 year on their life and the studies. That's a big failure of the government. But that's not an issue in the elections. Everyone is concerned about the question, does Netanyahu have the 61 or doesn't he have it? So it's quite a significant stage or time in our history where we stand. And I hope very much, if he wins or if he loses, that we finally have a government for at least 30 years to start and tackle the huge issues and challenges that were produced as a result of the pandemic.
Danny, can I ask you about the idea that for all the different colors, perspectives, coalitions, names of parties which change month after month and year after year, it's quite a binary election system. It's those who are pro-Netanyahu and those who are against Netanyahu. I mean, we can really distill everything down to that, can't we?
Well, yes, I guess for the moment and probably for the last 10 years, this is the case. But when we look into a political system, for the long run, we cannot just look at a specific example or a private case of Netanyahu. I believe that probably everybody believes, except Netanyahu himself, maybe, that at some point he will have to step down, hopefully with a very good health and on his 2 feet, unlike Sharon. But this maybe shows you today the shallowness of the Israeli politics, and the landscape is really very, very poor. It's poor ideologically, as Nachman just said. It's poor from a vision point of view, and even policies. If it all being reduced to yes, Netanyahu or not, this is what brings the situation to almost a halt, with 3 or 4 elections in almost or less than 2 years. This is very, very troublesome. We do need an electoral reform. But unfortunately, the only ones who can allow that are those who benefit from the current situation and the current system. This is why I do not see an electoral reform in the offing, and it will have to be a major, deep social change in the country to effect such a possibility of electoral reform.
We'll talk about how we arrive at electoral reform if the establishment is so against it in just a moment. But Nachman, can I ask you, every election landscape is so radically different in Israel. We had the blue and whites with Benny Gantz, and he nearly made prime minister. He's not going to now. That's all history. The next challenger, it's like a boxing match. We welcome Gideon Saar, a former Likudnik who's broken ranks. Does he stand a chance?
I don't think so. No, sorry. By the way, blue and white had no any ideology. It was just a group of very good people in principle, coming from all sides and of the political map, but all of them were united under one flag. how to bring Netanyahu down. And they failed. They finally joined the coalition, some of them. Some of them remain in the opposition. Some of them started a new party and a third party and a fourth party. This is one of the major weaknesses of the Israeli political system. At the end of the day, blue and white was just a myth, just a dream. And by the way, I don't take any credit for that, but I would have told you that from the very beginning. Because if you don't have any ideological, as Danny rightly mentioned, the ideological cement or that brings people together, make them work together towards a certain and common goal, who are they? What do they stand for? And Gideon Sa'ar is coming from the deep right. Actually, I would say even he's more to the right than Netanyahu. Netanyahu, in a way, proved in the course of his very long term that he can be pragmatist, that he's ready to make compromise once in a while. The last one, very significant, was kind of peace or normalized relations with UAE and Bahrain and later on Morocco and Sudan, instead of annexing territories of the way lemma for a right-wing leader? No. Eretz Israel comes first. The rest they don't. And he preferred his own choice. That was it was his decision. No one told him what to do. He doesn't consult with his friends, the party, I can assure you. He said to himself, I'd like to promote Israel legitimacy. And if I can finally break this high wall of Arab animosity towards Israel, and I have new partners, even if it's far away in the Gulf, these are not the neighboring countries, let's take this opportunity, and I wouldn't miss it. So I don't know if Gideon Sa'ar, had he been there, would have been the same decision. I'm almost sure he wouldn't. And the same to another politician by the name of Naftali Bennett. So I don't know what Gideon Sa'ar prospects are. With 13 Knesset members, or as of yesterday's poll, he's not going to fly too high. As long as he may join coalition with the Netanyahu and maybe a kind of rotation, which usually Netanyahu gives the rotation for the second or the third part of the Knesset term, and they'll never get there, okay? When his term expires, new elections are being called, okay? He has a reputation that he gives the other party the rotation for the second half or the third half or the third part of the Knesset term. You never reach there, you never get there. That's exactly what's happening now. November is the time to rotate the government. They'll get there. Probably Gantz will not be even a Knesset member.
February is a long time in politics.
Right.
Goes the saying, no one ever said just until now. Nachman, can I just stay with you there? Because let's just rewind to something you said right at the beginning of that answer, which was that the reason why Benny Gantz and his blue and white coalition never succeeded, and I don't want to take credit for this particularly, but I could have told you there wasn't anything ideological about them except that they really all wanted to get Netanyahu out together. And so may I ask you, as a Labour Party member, it's been such a huge part of Israel's history in the first 3 decades. But after losing 8 elections, Menachem Begin's Likud party have rarely looked back since 1977. Nachman, Labour faced extinction in the last election. What is the future, not just of Labour, but of the left? You know, was the blue and white really a failure of the ideological left to actually make traction with the people? It's the right, which is the sort of the living and being ideology of Israeli life in 2021.
It's a lack of leadership, first of all. The center left has had no leadership since, I would say, the generation of Rabin and Peres. Even Barak was able to hold to the prime ministership for a year and a half and failed. Sharon was, that Danny knew very well and worked for, was a kind of in between, a compromise of right and left. Kadima was combined political powers from right and left. It also survived only for a while. Ehud Olmert was very much actually deep in his heart belonged to the right, but later on he chose a different political way. But I would say that the center left hasn't been able to produce new generations of leaders, unlike the Likud and unlike the right wing. Now you see, for example, two new names, as I just mentioned. One of them is Sar, the other is Naftali Bennett, in their 50s, relatively young as a politician, but quite experienced. And I can name others as well. So there's a kind of prepared line of leaders to take over for Netanyahu. I don't see them on the central left. My party finally produced a new name, a lady, a female by the name Merav Michaeli. She's new, she's a newcomer. She's altogether 7 or 8 years in the Knesset, never served in any executive position. So she cannot claim that she's the next prime minister of the state of Israel, right? Many Israelis who may move from left to center and from center to right in a gradual process that we can detect from one election campaign to the other. So there's no longer, I mean, it's between the Jewish, as we say in general, the Jewish population in Israel, a proportion is 60% center right and 40% center left. The challenge is the prospects of the center left to replace Netanyahu on the right wing is under 50% right now.
So now, gentlemen, having discussed the introductory issues at stake here, it is time to unpack electoral reform. Otherwise, we are going to have a 5th election, a 6th election, a 7th election, and maybe even before lockdown has finished. Let's hope not. Now we're talking about, you've hinted, both of you, that it's really against the establishment's interests to look for a reform and that actually social change is required. Are we on the edge, Ambassador Ayalon, of some social change now because of what the pandemic forced upon the people? In the UK, and I want you to talk about what we're seeing in Israel, there is a communal kind of attitude of helping one another in the millennial generation, simply because I believe they can't afford a stake in the society in which they're growing up into. In other words, house prices, just like Tel Aviv, just like Haifa, Yerushalayim, they are sky high, 25 times the average salary if they're lucky enough to have a job. So is it now a case of actually that society will change enough for that electoral form to become a reality?
Well, Ellen, if you will allow me, I just want to pick up one thing that on the heels of what Nachman said about the Labor Party. Sometimes I think the Labor Party, when you compare it to Likud, is a classic case where rules and regulations overpower substance. Why do I say that? If you look at the Likud, for the last 100 years, since Jabotinsky pretty much formed the revisionist movement, they've had altogether only 4 leaders. Exactly, 4 leaders. If you go back, and it's Begin, of course, and Shamir, and Sharon. You would say, it was an interim. I agree with Nachman, and of course Netanyahu. Now, why couldn't Labor do the same? It's very, very simple in my mind. It's so simple that it just boggles the mind. It's a matter of the rules and regulations of the party. Nachman knows it very well. The rules of the party of Labor is that if the head of the party lost an election, that means he did not become the premier, the prime minister, then there should or could be elections within 14 months of the last elections for the head of the party. So you see that the heads of the parties were always very, very vulnerable and the switch was just in intolerable pace. And I think this is part of the problems we have now. And once you cannot hold the party together and leadership, then everything else falls apart in terms of ideology, in terms of vision, in terms of policies, in terms of really parliamentarian, effective parliamentarian tactics. Because also, you know, the opposition, and part of the, you know, of the fact that Likud has been so strong is the opposition is very, very weak. Not only in the eyes of the public. I can tell you, for instance, you know, that when Likud was in opposition from 2006 to 2009, Netanyahu headed a party of 12 seats. And these 12 seats were able to really, I would say, outmaneuver the major coalition, big coalition of Olmert. So this is about the differences, I would say, between Likud and Labor, which has nothing to do with policies and ideology. You know, Israel's, you know, we're talking about left, right, or center. I don't think that this category qualifies anymore. These are not really the real parameters, because there is hardly any difference today. I mean, you have on the very fringes, you have the extreme right, the extreme left. There you can say there is a marked, very, very visible, distinguished, you know, parity, or I mean, difference between the parties. But when you look from Likud through Kadima or through blue and white or whatever to the Labor, there is always almost no difference, because the issue right now is not the territories, is not war or peace. And when it comes to the issue of the Palestinians, the center of Israel moved all the way to the right for two reasons. First of all, it was the Intifada, the second Intifada. You know, before the second Intifada, 2000, 80% of Israelis were for a two-state solution. After the second Intifada, 80% of Israelis were against two-state solution, because they felt betrayed after Ehud Barak gave so much to the Palestinians, and instead of, you know, grabbing his hand and making peace, they not only rejected his offer, but they started this Intifada, which cost 1,000 of Israeli lives and 7,000 maimed and injured, and that was terrible. The second reason is the disengagement from Gaza. With the disengagement from Gaza, when everybody was hoping for a paradigmatic shift, changing the landscape with the Palestinians, what we saw quite the opposite. Hamas took over, launched all the terror and the rockets, and today this is where we are. Almost nobody. This election, for instance, is, as you mentioned, John, is for Bibi or against Bibi. Not even economic issues, not social issues or anything else. Now, when we come to the effect of the pandemic on Israeli society, I would say that here we have to always also distinguish between the different sectors of the society. I mean, it's not a universal effect on everyone. I think those who are the haves, you know, in Tel Aviv and Haifa and the major cities, I think they will not change their way of lives. Their way of life has not been changed at all. You know, we have a very strong economy, because most of it is based on high tech, which has not been affected by by COVID, quite the contrary. And so this will continue to be as it is. Now, when we look at the other two sectors, which are significant, you know, when I talk about the strong sector, I do not distinguish between left or right. You know, you have Likudniks there, you have Labor there, and all the others. So in my you know, analysis here, they are just one block for the social issues, not the political ones. But we have two other segments which are very important. One is the Haredim, you know, the ultra-Orthodox, and the other one are the Arabs. So here, I believe there's going to be some reckoning, especially with the Haredi, with the ultra-Orthodox, where they have, or many of them, we don't see it right now, but there are deep currents that show a lack of confidence in their leaders, in their spiritual leaders. There are no strong leaders like Rabbi Shach that we had before, or Rabbi Eliyahu, the Shas guy, Eliyahu Yosef, Maran
Ovadia Yosef.
Ovadia Yosef. Those were leaders who could really reason, and they were strong enough and confident enough that they were able also to be lenient when it came to the halacha. The weaker the rabbis are, the less they can be lenient on the halacha, and they are afraid to make any changes or to allow anything. The easiest thing is to say no, 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 no. It's much harder to say yes and to distinguish when you can say yes and where you can say no. I think that the leadership of the ultra-Orthodox have really did a very, very poor service for their constituencies. Hence, most of the corona cases are within the ultra-Orthodox. And once this is all over, I think there is going to be reckoning again. And many of them, we may see, may go into the labor market, may go into academic pursuits of or a course of their volition, which will be great basically for the country. The Arabs may do the same, although in their case there is no leadership to speak of, and over there it's pretty much catch as you can, and nothing has been really taking over and helping them. But in very few years, we may have 40% of our population, which are the non-productive sectors. Right now, it's the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs, and that could be very, 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 very significant for Israel's social fabric and also for its political and economic future. But I am bullish because I believe that at the end of the day, and maybe this pandemic, what it will do is that it will bring in significant part of the ultra-Orthodox into the mainstream, and I believe Arabs as well.
Danny, that was a fantastic answer, and I've had to cross out 3 questions from my schedule. Such was the scope and selection of answers. So thank you for that, Ambassador. Let me turn to
Danny can ask the questions and answer them. That's the perfect interview.
Indeed. And what you're talking about there, Danny, are really fascinating sociological changes brought about by the pandemic, where the religious go into wider society, become academics on a secular basis, and contribute more to our society, and the same for the Arabs. We have seen, obviously, huge schisms develop, huge rows between communities. Not that they were particularly cohesive before the lockdown, but boy, oh boy, some things really are happening. You know, a talk of a Chilul Hashem, a divorce between certain religious communities, such as the disobedience of lockdown. With the Arab communities, we're starting to see some of the, shall we say, disaffected coming out and being more vociferous, that they're engaging more in their power. You know, that's not a sort of an internal threat, but it's something to think about, Nachman. I mean, it's very, very good to hear Danny being so bullish and about the consequences being positive, a new cohesion we hadn't have imagined. But Nachman, it may not work out like that. I mean, we are still in a situation around the world and in Israel that is unprecedented. We don't really know the societal, economic, and geographical, demographic conclusions that will come of this. They may take decades to emerge.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you. Of course, we don't know what will be the long-term implications of the pandemic on Israel and the world as a whole. I think that what we can say right now is that it helped us to understand very well that the big gaps within Israel between poor and rich. We have many rich people, but too many poor people. 1/3 of the Israeli kids are under poverty line. 21% of the senior citizens are under poverty line. The same percentage of families that cannot continue. Absolutely, that should be going down immediately. I mean, as much as possible. The two about center and periphery, like any other place in the world, the poor and those who live far away from the center die in a higher percentage than those who live in the center, and those who enjoy better health conditions and services. Also, unfortunately, the gaps between Jews and Arabs living in Israel, which the Arabs fall into the remote communities and the poor communities. And Danny described where Israel is heading. When it comes to the Arabs, I'd like to say one thing. I'd like to praise Prime Minister Netanyahu, what he did recently, because he broke the lines between Jews and Arabs. And he finally decided, from his own reasons, that maybe he can draw 1 or 2 mandates from the Arab society in Israel. Had you told him that 2 years ago, when he went on television or on social media and called the Jews to come out immediately to the polls in order to defeat hundreds of thousands of Arabs that are running to vote right now. And he said, emergency, guys, I mean, save Israel because the Arabs are going to win the elections. And they came and he was reelected. But this is a new Netanyahu, at least it looks like. And he says, well, why don't we live with the Arabs? He visited one of the Arab villages. By the way, Arab villages sometimes are much longer than cities in Israel. And he looked around and said, I see so many Arabs around. And he made a certain political alliance with one of the heads of the Arab parties that may be linked to his coalition after the elections, if elected. He did something very important that he didn't mean to, if you ask me, because there was a kind of boycott on Arabs. Arabs were not included in any potential future government. Okay, I understand some reasons, security matters, defense matters. Okay, I understand, but we can find ways. We have a security cabinet that Danny was a member of it. They can handle Israel security. But other issues are very common to every single Israeli, Jew or Arab. So Netanyahu, from his own political reasons, I don't think he suddenly woke up in the morning, but it doesn't really matter. Years to come, people will not remember any longer, but the very fact that for the first time in the history of the Likud, there is an Arab member that was positioned on the list. It's not realistic, he wouldn't be elected, but it doesn't really matter. And all his colleagues in the party, the government ministers, the party members, the Knesset members, and the rest of theirs are very quiet. As I haven't heard any word. So maybe this is a new chapter of Israeli-Arab relations in Israel now, which is very promising. And I have a lot of hope that may change the landscape of Israeli politics. Maybe the 10, 12, I don't know what the number of Arab Knesset members will be elected in the joint list. Well, they are partners. Let's talk to them and see if they can join in and be part of the entire. 1 out of 5 Israelis is an Arab, okay? So they cannot be kept out of the game and just living in their own villages. They became integral parts of the Israeli society. Ask Danny how many of his medical doctors are Arabs. Mine, out of 5, are 3 Arabs, Israeli Arabs. And I don't ask them if they are Muslim or Jewish or Christian when I come to get their advice, okay? When he goes to the pharmacy next to his home in Ramat HaSharon, 9 out of 10 are Arabs, okay? And let's go on and on and on. So it's time to figure out, we have Arabs living 20%. Those who, of course, accept Israel as a Jewish democratic state, and I emphasize Jewish democratic state, are part of Israel's society now for good. And thank you, Mr. Netanyahu, of helping us finally to integrate, fully integrate Arabs, at least partially, into the entire Israeli society.
This is an extremely pleasant political discussion, gentlemen, with lots of hope and lots of ambition. Kol hakavod to both of you. I really.
Danny makes the whole difference.
No. Listen, actually, we both have the same upbringing. We did the same, course in our lives, and we could easily switch parties without even noticing.
Well, this is great, and this is something that as a British European, and I say that as someone who voted for Brexit, which I see as the model of the nation state, just as Israel is, as the cohesive way of everyone wrapping themselves in the flag, associating with the values of their country. And Nachman and Danny, you come from different parties, but you say your backgrounds are similar, that your ideologies overlap so very, very much. You have the same kinship for the nation. I, having not been born in Israel, have a similar kinship to the country as you do, as a member of the Jewish diaspora. But this idea that Arabs too are beginning in number to recognize that they are best served as Israelis rather than Syrians, their cousins over the border in Lebanon, in failed states right across the region. Here they are with rights. It's not perfect on the street, but it's not bad either. And they're leading lives of fulfillment in Israel. This sounds, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, as the real kernel of a new political consensus on the right, even.
Yes, and even though one might think that the overture of Netanyahu to the Arabs in Israel is out of political expediency, which could be the case, but we say in Hebrew, we say even gam im lo mitoch lishma lishma. That means even if you did the right things out of the wrong intentions, you did the right thing. And the fact that
I was looking for this translation for a long time. I had the same expression in Hebrew, but I said, where will I get the translation? Thank you, Danny. Now I know how to translate it to an American audience. Thank you.
So I think what Netanyahu did is extraordinary, and it's amazing. Only he could do it.
Absolutely.
It's like they say in Israel, only the left in Israel can wage wars, and only the right can make peace. Because there's no opposition. And I believe that what Bibi Netanyahu has been doing now will affect the country for generations to come, and maybe even for good, for the reasons that Nachman mentioned, and also, Johnny, what you mentioned. The Arab Israelis, I believe, were just waiting for a trigger, because 99% of them would like to be proud Israeli citizens. And they're not Zionists maybe, but proud Israeli citizens, and especially in comparison to their kins in the entire region, in the Middle East. And Nachman is right. Most of the pharmacists I encounter are Arabs, many doctors, and they're doing a very good job. And I believe that this may be setting a trend. By the way, it's also something that in order to be fair to Netanyahu, and Nachman will verify that, even before this overture, for political reasons or not, the Netanyahu government over the last 10 years has given more money, has granted more money to the Arab sector in Israel than any government beforehand. And to raise their standard of living, also their education, and also there is a many government initiatives to bring many youngsters, Arab youngsters, into the high-tech field. And I know personally of some high-tech companies that were started by Arab Israelis, and some of them are very, very successful. And this, I think, would be just to the betterment of the country, and also may help at the end of the day, peace. By the way, the Abraham Accord, also what Bibi Netanyahu achieved, which is also extraordinary, is also affecting the Arab Israelis, because when they see the neighboring countries here, reaching out to Israel for many reasons, when they see that they can, with an Israeli passport, go over to the Emirates or be a bridge or do business and go as a go-between the Jewish Israelis and the Arabs in the Gulf, it makes their lives much, much easier. It gives them a great economic opportunity and also pride.
This is marvelous. This conversation is getting better and better. Gentlemen, we'll talk about the character of the Jewish state when the Arabs are fully integrated into the higher echelons of society in just a moment. But let's try and get back to the central discussion about electoral reform and about how the elections are affecting Israeli society, a tragedy that you called it earlier on. Now, of course, Netanyahu is Israel's longest serving prime minister, probably because he's also Israel's most adept ever politician. He doesn't even have to win an election, win a popular vote to be prime minister, as we saw with Tzipi Livni, who beat him in the vote count. She couldn't form a coalition. He could. Nachman, he is the guy around the Knesset that can fix things, bang heads together. And it seems though, even if he is heading to a majority or not, he's the guy in situ. It's his to lose.
You expect Bibi to change the electoral system?
No, I'm just saying that he's the most adept at forming coalitions. He's the fixer. It's his machine.
But it's totally dependent on the ultra-Orthodox parties that Danny mentioned earlier, and they would like to see no change. Since 1948, they don't want to pass a constitution for the state of Israel. We have no constitution, democracy without constitution. Where we do have a set of basic laws, which are, some of them are controversial. We rather have a constitution like any other democracy, but the Orthodox will never let it pass. And
we don't have one in Britain.
Changes as well.
We don't have one in Britain either. We have the Magna Carta, which is no one really.
Okay, but you have such a long tradition. You have such a long tradition.
It's a huge tradition.
I'm not really concerned about your.
Right,
Israel is a young country, young democracy, and every government has the big appetite to make the fundamental changes in the political system. And then you have to rely, and also the Supreme Court, even when it comes to the Supreme Court, maybe me and Danny do not agree. Supreme Court in Israel has a big appetite, and they interfere sometimes in issues they are not supposed to. Okay, but that's the way it developed because there was no constitution to rely on. So they rely on basic laws that at the time they were actually the power beyond those basic laws. That's fine for the time being, but we need a constitution that every Israeli will be able to relate to. So we were running out far away from that. I don't see, unfortunately, any chance for electoral reform. I can give you endless ideas that were raised during the years, what should be done in order to improve the system. One of them is a kind of regional election, at least for half of the Knesset members, to give the periphery a certain representation in the Knesset, because most of the Knesset members are coming from the center of the country. They're not aware, they're not sensitive enough to the needs of the wills of the people all around the country. It wouldn't work because the ultra-Orthodox will lose all the political power because they are dominant in one or two major cities or three, and that's all. So if you hold regional elections in Israel, they will lose half of their political power. They will never have. They are very conservative. They are not open for any change. I mean, if they were not conservative, they were not ultra-Orthodox. I don't blame them. That's what they believe in. And the rest of the Israelis, they are dependent on them. Every coalition, this coalition, the next one, and the last one, all of them depend on the ultra-Orthodox, and they pay them as much as they charge to stay in power, as much as they charge. There was one attempt a few years ago when Yair Lapid joined Netanyahu's coalition, and the Orthodox were left out. That exercise will not repeat itself. Netanyahu totally relies on the ultra-Orthodox. They take them into account when he builds this coalition. Actually, he starts with the, if you ask me, he has already signed a coalition agreement with the ultra-Orthodox parties for the next Knesset. The agreements are signed. They just have to rectify them at the last moment, because that's the way it is. And I believe it's time for Israel to move forward. But I don't see a chance, which is very pessimistic, I know, but we have to be realistic as well.
Gentlemen, let's talk about the character of a Jewish state with a fully emancipated, fully educated, and fully assimilated, in a way that we talk about in a secular fashion, Arab community. As you say, 1 in 5 Israelis is Arab. We have a population of around 9 million people. What about 9.2? Yes. What about the character of a Jewish state? When, for example, we'll have a cabinet minister, maybe even someone who's powerful enough, who served in the IDF, from an Arab background, that could even one day become prime minister. There should be nothing to stop that elevation. But my question is, what about the character of something that is supposed to be a Jewish state, Ambassador Ayalon?
Well, first of all, Israel is a Jewish state not just in a formal way or by definition. It is the very core identity of the Jews in Israel. And being a Jewish state is not something which is
negotiable.
It's not an exception to the rule. There are many countries who define themselves according to the main religion, which is fine. You know, most of the Arab countries, and also some Christian countries, whether it's Switzerland and others. I believe also in England, John, your country, the Church of England is pretty much the go-to religion or whatever.
Yeah, we have a you see, I think this is something that we're having in Britain, which is bedeviling our society, and this is something that I'm talking about from a British perspective, is that the Church of England is losing its moorings here. Of course, it is the establishment, but there's nothing really to stop the Church of England being overtaken by completely secular values. Less than 1 million English people go to church on a Sunday in a population of 60 million people. Of course, everyone celebrates Christmas here because that's what the markets want us to spend our money on in November and December, and of course Easter. But Christianity is a declining power in Britain and the West, and so obviously we are not in the same situation with Judaism in Israel. But obviously it's the character of the Jewish state which would be challenged by a successful Arab society in Israel.
So to that, my answer is very clear. Judaism is not only a religion; it's a whole civilization, basically. It is a nationality. It is ethnicity. It is a way of life. It's a cultural thing. And there's no oxymoron of a non-Jew living with all the rights in a Jewish state, just like we. I said it to many in the international community, including Palestinians. Listen, we as Jews who lived for 2,000 years in the diaspora, just spanning over 150 different countries, Christians and of course Muslims and even Hindus and all that. We kept to our own identity as Jews, but we were very loyal to the crown or to the government, and there should not be any antagonism between the two. So this is why I don't see any problem for a non-Jew, Arab, Christian, or Muslim like to live in Israel, to be proud of the country, to be part of the experience of the Israeli society, but and not being a Jew, as long, of course, as they have full rights as everyone else. You know, Menachem Begin once said, and he was a great liberal, you know, and Jabotinsky was a great liberal, not at all like many of those now who supposedly are their followers in the Likud party. But Menachem Begin said that for the non-Jews in the country, all the rights in the land, but no right to the land. And I think this is what is going in, you know, any other country. You look at France, you know, France is a French country. England is an English country. Israel is a Jewish country. It's synonymous, and it shouldn't be looked upon as something unique. And those who try to deny the character of Israel as a Jewish state are those who would deny Israel being a country altogether. And this is why, if we can digress a little bit, this is why the Palestinians have always said that they will never, ever recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Because they know once they recognize Israel as a Jewish state, they have no claims anymore, and there's no reason not to make peace.
That's a very simple and very excellent explanation of why the Palestinian cause is so appealing to many non-Palestinians who have no connection with the Palestinian history or its dialogue and wars with Israel. That I really explains it very, very well for our viewers. Thank you very much for that, Danny. Nachman, when we were ice breaking, we met a couple of days ago on Zoom to meet each other for the first time, and it was a most entertaining introduction. And I'm going to ask you the question again, because I think, Danny, I can speak for Danny as well, and Benjamin indeed. We were most entertained by your answer, Nachman, about how after 20 days, Joe Biden has still not called Benjamin Netanyahu, but you're telling me that it's nothing to worry about.
Well, since then there are 22 days now. He hasn't called him yet. Not only that, the other day, former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, on Twitter, he tweeted, he urged the president, Biden. He said, President Biden, why don't you finally call Netanyahu? Not only that, he provided him with his phone number, as if they don't have the phone number at the White House. They have to look at the phone directory. By the way, don't try Netanyahu on cell phone, because he doesn't carry cell phone. That's from other reasons. Doesn't carry cell phone, doesn't use a computer, a laptop, and so on. I mean, he's very careful. So but President Biden, if you want to call Netanyahu, don't look for his cell phone number. He has no cell phone number, but he's in his office now waiting for your call to come. I'm not that concerned about that. He only get to the president of China yesterday, okay? So let's go on the list. Israel doesn't come before China. China borders, threatens, and engage with America in so many fronts. This is the first. He talked to Putin the other day, and he has COVID-19 in this country, sure, in numbers, in figures, in proportions that America has never experienced in the entire history. And the Congress is now engaged in the second impeachment trial of a former US president, okay? He's been president until a month ago. I mean, this is something, these are issues much heavier than the question of phone call between Netanyahu and Biden that Bibi needs very much for probably his election campaign, that he can say, well, my long-time friendship with Biden is continuing. Let me tell you something. I believe Biden is a friend of Israel. I'm sure Danny knows him very well, and he can attest to it, and let him also describe his relations. Biden is around for 50 years. 50 years. We would have known anything. We know everything about him. He's a friend of Israel. but he's currently the president of the United States. And by the way, the reason he doesn't call Netanyahu, because he says to himself, Netanyahu knows I'm a friend of Israel. Netanyahu knows I'm going to do everything to help Israel when it comes to the point Israel needs us. Okay, so let's just deal. I expect Netanyahu to say, okay, I'm not concerned about this phone call. I trust the Biden. I trust Kamala Harris. I trust many others in this administration. I trust, well, it has for him to say, I trust even the Democratic Party. Well, that's something to ask some questions about, but he has to say that. And that's it. Friendship and strong relations, which Danny was one of the architects, will remain forever. We will disappear. The friendship between the two nations will remain forever. That's what I believe.
Nachman, you didn't disappoint with that answer. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
And
was it as an alternative?
It was excellent. Great use of hands, great oratory. I enjoyed every moment of that. Thank you very much indeed,
okay.
Sir.
And by the way, anyone can use this number to call Netanyahu and talk to him if he's in his office and waiting for phone calls to come. So pick up the phone, call Netanyahu, say, hey, yes, not Biden and someone else, but I want to talk to you.
But then
972
972. Okay, I have the number here. I can give you the number too.
Ambassador, I mean, we have a situation here where I suppose the translation of impeachment into Israeli politics is indictment, a political tool to attempt to stifle the leader of the country. Of course, he is facing an indictment. Is that a non-issue in this latest election, this fourth election in 2 years?
Evidently not, because we see also in the polls that the needle doesn't change. All those who have opposed Netanyahu to begin with are vehemently for his removal because on the grounds of his indictment. Those who were for Netanyahu continue to support him. And you're right, Johnny. It's, if we can make the comparison to the American system, then the indictment in Israel is like the impeachment by the House in the United States. And then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate is serves as the jury or the judge. And this is the case here, where after indictment, the final conclusive decision is by the court. And incidentally, according to the Israeli law, there is nothing to prevent anyone to serve as a prime minister only until conviction. And if indicted, he can continue to serve. By the way, this is in the stark difference than to a minister. If a minister is indicted, he has to resign, but not a prime minister. And that could be
the president too, and the president too.
Exactly. And this may sound like odd, if a minister has to resign, why not a prime minister? We say in Hebrew, kal vachomer, for sure a prime minister. But there is a logic to this legislation, and the logic is very, very simple. When a minister is indicted, and we have had some cases like that, and he goes to court, and he is exonerated, let's say he's found not guilty, he can resume his post. And no major shift in the political landscape in the country. However, if a prime minister resigns, the whole government resigns. That means maybe a new election. And also from a justice point of view or a fairness point of view, if a prime minister has his day in court and he is found not guilty, he cannot resume his post as prime minister as any other minister. So this is the logic behind this law. And of course, Netanyahu is using it to the hilt.
Danny, thank you for that. My final question as we wrap this up goes back to the original proposition of this discussion. Can Israel's electoral system be salvaged? Gentlemen, I'm going to ask both of you, we've seen 4 elections in less than 2 years. How many elections will we see in Israel over the next 2 years? Nachman.
Well, I have to be elected to the upcoming Knesset. And I urge all my listeners, including Danny, who is currently in the country, to come and vote for Labor on March 23rd. I hope very much to be. I'm not sure that Labor is strong enough to get 8 Knesset mandate, but who knows, miracles happened, as we know. A month ago, the Labor was under the threshold with no Knesset mandates or Knesset seats at all. And now we celebrate around 6 to 7, so maybe it will happen, especially when after I come to Israel, I'm sure everything will change. I'm just kidding. But honestly, as an Israeli citizen, I'm very much worried about the present situation. There's no government, there's no budget state budget for over 2 years. You know what it means. The country is running like a business. I mean, not like a business, like a routine organization, routinely, without paying attention. Pardon me?
Like automatic
pilot. Yeah, automatic pilot, without paying attention to the present urgent needs, because the budget is 2 years old. But 2 years old, 2 years ago, no one knew about COVID-19, right? And many other issues. Iran is alarmingly getting close to nuclear bomb. It's not a joke. Danny will agree with me. They're getting closer. I'm not just saying wolf. We all know what's going on. Where's the government? Who is in charge? When you are always focused on the upcoming elections, for one day to another, all your attention, all the government, the cabinet, the Knesset members, everyone is dealing with upcoming elections. Who is in charge? Who is in charge of the life of millions of Israelis? So it's time to stop this circle of elections, one after the other, and sit down and figure out what can we do for the better life of the Israeli citizens. We all owe them everything we can. I mean, what are the why the Israeli trust, the Israeli people trust in the Knesset has declined so much, and the government to few percentage? Because those people, they say, live in a dream. The people say they don't live in a dream. They got their own salary, which is fine, their cars, their stuff. They don't care for us. And even recently, they got a raise. Knesset members had a raise in January of 11% of 11%, where hundreds of thousands of Israelis are unemployed. They got an 11% raise because of a certain system. Okay, so it's time to take care of us, not us taking care of you. I have no immediate solution for that. Let's see how the next election will end, and then figure out what to do. And I'm not suggesting to join Labor, the Likud part, the Likud coalition. Oh yeah, maybe Likud, but without Netanyahu. I mean, this is a condition for the Labor Party not to join any coalition as long as Netanyahu is there. Not that I dislike him, actually on a personal level I do, but I think that the Prime Minister, and Danny just explained the situation legally, who faces 3 severe allegations in Jerusalem, in a court in Jerusalem, should spend all his time on this trial. And he cannot jump from the court to his office back and forth. That has never happened in Israeli history, never. And when, unfortunately, another prime minister, Ehud Olmert, at the time, had found himself in a similar situation, he stepped down. He stepped down under pressure, but he did. And I expect Netanyahu to do exactly the same. You have a trial, deal with it. If you are acquitted, you can go back. Unfortunately, you lost the trial, we'll wait for the verdict.
Danny, can you give me a short reply to that, please?
Sorry for the long reply.
Not at all. No, I just want to hear what Danny has to say. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to say that I may take exceptions in the ballots this coming month just to have Nachman get into the Knesset, because we need more people like him. He is an exception to the rule. And by the way, the reason I support so much an electoral reform, basically to go into a regional elections by districts, let's say like in the United States, is first and foremost not a matter of governability. First and foremost, the quality of the elected officials. Right now, they do not answer to the public. If they run in their own districts, they will have to answer to the public, and the public will judge them on their own merit, and we will have much, much better ensemble of politicians. Now, about elections, unfortunately, you know, I cannot predict, and it could go either way, it could go for more and more elections, or maybe something will move. By the way, you know, when you talk about Netanyahu, to be fair to him, Netanyahu is, I would say, a tragic figure almost in biblical proportion, because he is probably the most talented individual and politician in Israel. Intelligent, gifted, abilities to do anything on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, sometimes he deals with you know, things like the little things and even muddy things. You know, there is a big gap between the two things. But Netanyahu has also shown that he is the only one that can change the course of the Israeli society without causing any ripple effects, just like he does with the Arabs. He, you know, and this is what a great leader can do. You know, he can change course on a flip of a dime. So, for instance, if you ask me what Netanyahu can do, and you know, and he likes to surprise people sometimes, he could easily decide that, well, maybe this is his last term, or he's going to serve as, let's say, 4 more years as prime minister, and he may ditch the ultra-Orthodox that Nachman referred to, and do a coalition with labor and the center to do things that we have just discussed, you know, political reform and many other things that can really be good for the country and for the people. I wouldn't pass it by him to do that.
Gentlemen, I expected illumination and wisdom, but I also got a whole heap of hope there. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for this extensive discussion on Israel's electoral system. Ambassador Danny Ayalon, thank you very much, sir. And Dr. Nachman Shai, good luck on March the 23rd. And let's see Labour make a stunning return to Israeli politics. Whichever way you vote, good luck to everyone. I just want to say to the Miriam Institute, thank you to Rosita Panini, to Benjamin Anthony, and to Alan Langer. My name is Johnny Gould. Thank you very much for engaging in our debate, our discussion today.